formal education. And our presenter is Audrey Webb, Nebraska Department of Education Science Curriculum Specialist. Audrey, it's all yours.
Awesome, thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. My name is Audrey Webb. Just like Jamie just said, I am the Science Education Specialist for the Nebraska Department of Education. Got a couple links in the chat for you. You can go ahead and open the slides. There's going to be a Jamboard link. We'll break out into breakout rooms for just a little group discussion and come back. So you'll need the slides so you can access that link. There's also I dropped the Jamboard link in. And if you were in the session right prior to this, David Harwood's about climate change. As he was speaking, it just sort of brought to mind this set of lesson plans around the Mauna Loa data that I've used in the classroom before. This is something that can be modified K-12. So if you're interested in kind of how to invite students K-12 into that discussion with really deep data analysis, that's a link to check out too. So that's the bottom one I included in there. And if you could go ahead, just kind of as I'm introducing myself, drop your name, role, and where you are. I'm pretty curious to see where people are coming from today into the chat as well. So we will go ahead and get started. So my name is Audrey Webb. Wanted to kind of give a quick background. I'm the Education Science Specialist at the NDE. I started June 2020, so I've been here for about a year and a half. And in case I haven't met you yet, I just kind of wanted to give a bit of my backstory, how I came to be here. Grew up in Northwest Iowa, was brought into the world of education through literacy, and then knew I needed to come back to my first love of science education, pursued my master's in science curriculum and instruction at Stanford University, and then taught in the Bay Area for a number of years with a focus on culturally relevant pedagogy, locally based phenomenon through the San Francisco teacher residency, where I was teaching high school physics, bio, and physiology. So that's sort of my background. And like I just said, have been at the NDE for about a year and a half now, and have been loving every moment, really excited to meet the really rich science community in Nebraska. So if I haven't met you yet, please feel free to reach out after this conversation to continue collaboration. So today we're going to take a quick overview of a phenomenon-based segment. People ask me sort of a lot, how can science entities plug into what's going on in the K-12 space? So kind of wanted to just start with a model unit that some Nebraska teachers have been developing around some local Nebraska context conservation issues. So I'll show you a couple of the materials. You'll get into small groups, dive in and sort of discuss the design elements there. We'll have a bit of a discussion sort of in the middle to kind of get all our thoughts on the table. And then from there, we'll take a big step back to get a 30,000 foot view picture of what is the state of science education nationally? What is it like here in Nebraska? When we say science standards, what do we even mean? And how is that looking as we together as a field conceptualize the power of science education in our classrooms? So that'll be kind of the bulk. And then at the end, I just have a couple ideas for if you're really wanting to get involved in this K-12 space, ways that we can kind of start that conversation, start collaborating. And I was really, really inspired by the keynote today. That idea of who wrote it, what's the focus, who is this for? And so when thinking about instructional materials, that's a huge conversation in the science space right now. It's what's the story we're telling about science when we're analyzing data, when we're conducting investigations, when we're looking at the world around us? How can we make that story as complete as possible? That's something that's really huge in the field of science curriculum development. And so it sort of is the basis of what we're hoping to achieve, is inviting our students into a rich narrative that takes multiple perspectives into account and really focuses on the deep issues of our local spaces. So that's the hope, the dream, the goal of science education right now. And that is going to take all of us working together to educate and invite the next generation into these conversations. So a quick synopsis of where these materials you're about to look at came from. Me and then the person, my analog and at the NDE around social studies, wrote a grant through National Geographic a year ago that did get funded. And we were able to ask Nebraska educators to create materials that are aligned to Nebraska standards, Nebraska vision, and the criteria for high quality, which we'll discuss and dissect later in the session. And they developed interdisciplinary units where students are looking at Nebraska phenomenon around nitrates and water quality, ecosystem health, and a couple Nebraska lakes. And they're doing that to unpack a series of standards, develop a conceptual understanding using data analysis of current local Nebraska issues as it relates to conservation. So we're in the first semester of piloting these units. They're piloted in 3 schools across the state, 1 out west, 1 in the middle, 1 all the way out east. And we're in the middle of making edits and revisions. So if this is something that really speaks out to you and you have some edits to make as we're looking through these materials, feel free. So with your group, I've included materials to discuss on slides 5 through 16. So you'll see on slide 5, oh, 1 second. You'll see on slide 5 the standards bundle that students are engaging with over the course of this 6-week unit. You'll see the storyline, how it progresses, the questions students are asking themselves to unearth and figure out those standards. You'll see some materials that were made by conservation organizations in Nebraska that teachers are utilizing in order to bring students into local issues. And then you'll see some materials that students go through in lesson 1. And you'll also see at the end the project that students engage with. So it is a lot to look through. I'm only going to give you about 5-ish minutes, but just to keep your kind of focus nice and tight in your group. Sorry, I'm running into some issues going back because of this video. With your group, connect around one of the following questions. How do you see teachers connecting Nebraska standards to Nebraska issues? Or if you are an organization, part of an organization that's creating materials that you hope Nebraska educators will use, you can kind of talk about how are teachers utilizing these materials, what kind of things are important about these materials. You can focus on what are some ways you see students being asked to think critically, to figure out the world around them. And then this is a question I added based on the keynote speaker. What perspectives do you still see are missing? Is there anything you would add to round out these materials? Does anyone have any questions about the ask?
And so Audrey, just so that we have this correct, so Amber put the Jamboard link in there. And then also I just added the slide link. So when we join into the Jamboard groups, you're wanting us to review the slides that you had shown us here, and then stop at the big stop sign for the review part. And then in the groups, in the Jamboard groups, there's some prompts within that, correct?
Absolutely. So you're reviewing these materials, getting your ideas centered around what is even happening in science education right now in the formal space, and then getting some ideas that will bring forth in a discussion that will kind of use to anchor the learning for the rest of the session. And you've got about 5 minutes with your group. All right, if there are no more questions, I'm going to stick you into those breakout rooms, and really excited to see what you all come up with. If you could also just appoint one person to kind of share a summary of what you all were thinking. We'll get 2 or 3 people to share out. So you should be invited to join. Hi, if you are just joining, are you interested in joining a small group, or would you like to wait until they come back? They've got about 3 more minutes.
Hi, I'm sorry. I think you asked me a question.
Yeah, no worries. We're just having small group conversation to go over some materials that K-12 educators just wrote around conservation issues, just to kind of get the lay of the land of what type of format these materials look like in the K-12 space. Would you want to join a group and just kind of hear what they're talking about, or do you want to wait until people come back?
When are they coming back?
In about 1.5 minutes now.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just wait.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'll look like the black sheep, right?
Yeah, no worries. I think I'm kind of causing people to just like, I don't know. I don't know if people felt ready to talk in small groups, but you know, I'm just bringing discourse to the table. So if you want, I'll stick the link to the slides in the chat, and you can just look through those materials on your own.
Nice.
It's slides 5 through 16. So
Okay.
let me get that really quickly for you. And you can go ahead and look at the Jamboard too. It doesn't look like many people are writing in it yet, but that's okay. So just go to the slides and look slide 5 through 16 at those materials.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not finding it. Live transcript, is that it? Live transcript.
No, that's not it. It's this first.
Is it share screen?
No, do you see over in the chat where it says
Oh.
it's the chat button?
I think
And
my
then
view was, yeah, I think I have my view maybe so large that I couldn't find it. Well, I'm glad that I don't have my video on because you'd see me squinting and.
all right, I'm about to bring people
Okay, that's
back
okay.
from breakouts.
Okay,
So
I'll just listen.
do you see the chat?
There it is. Yeah, okay.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, I think most people are still in their breakout rooms coming back, but if you're here waiting, just think through maybe 1 or 2 things that you could share from your group. And we'll have a quick discussion when everyone's back from their breakout. All right, it looks like most people are back. I know I threw a lot at you in a short amount of time. So what you were looking at again is a small section of a set of materials that teachers are piloting around conservation issues tied to drinking water in 2 different lakes in Nebraska. So I'm curious to see what you all thought, what your initial ideas were, just when reviewing these materials about how students are being asked to engage in Nebraska issues to figure out Nebraska standards. So does anyone have something from their group they'd like to kind of bring to the big group?
I'll go ahead and talk. So in our group, we kind of talked a little bit about how there's all these good resources out there. For instance, we talked about Project Wild, but unfortunately Project Wild we talked about is like a huge book. And there's not a lot of like, here's a quick thing that you need to use to this standard. There's resources out there, but oftentimes people, or like we talked about after school programs, they don't have the time or they're not necessarily, this isn't their forte of something that they do. They come in like 2 minutes before, you know, they just don't have time to find a resource specific for this specific standard. And there's some that are out there, but not necessarily Nebraska specific.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. That surfaced kind of a lot of the, I think, go-between where we've got all these entities in Nebraska that have this wealth of content knowledge and then having a hard time transitioning that in an actionable way in the K-12 space. Hugely important conversation to bring up. Thank you. And then Lauren, I see your hand up too. Do you have something to add?
Hi, I'm actually Abby. I'm here with Lauren and Natalie. We're part of Fontanelle Forest Education Department. We talked a little bit about question 3, looking at the different ways that students are asked to think critically in this material. And we thought it was really interesting, like the variety of maps and resources they were given, and then being asked to pull on that as well as background knowledge of their local area to like combine those factors and use their critical thinking to problem solve. I think there was a lot of good information in the interviews. That's good.
Awesome, thank you. So just the wealth of resources that we've got and putting them together in a way that makes sense for students as they're grappling with these local issues. That's a huge challenge of creating curriculum materials that make sense to students and are also true to what's happening in the real world around us. Any other points that you want to anyone wants to surface before we kind of move on to the next portion of the presentation? These were 2 really, really important ideas.
Audrey, I'm glad to share from group 1. I happen to be the only one with education background in a group of scientists. And so we talked about the realities of a disconnect for people in Nebraska who want to make connections to the classroom, but who are largely unfamiliar with the Nebraska standards. And so there is perhaps that challenge yet, that connecting challenge yet to be made.
I think that's absolutely so true. And there's this wealth of expertise that goes into all these research evidence-based ways to create materials that invite students in. And then at the same time, often in K-12 spaces, when we're working to create curricular materials that are based in what's happening in Nebraska, educators that are trained in the practices sometimes have a hard time making those connections to what's happening in the state. And so this is a really, it seems like both sides are missing this really important thing, and we've got to figure out a way to connect. So thank you so much for surfacing that. I'm hoping that the rest of this presentation kind of surfaces ways that we can start that conversation, like the keynotes. Multiple perspectives attacking the same issue in a cohesive, coherent way. So thank you so much for engaging with that. I know it was a lot right in a short amount of time, but I think it surfaced some really important conversations. So a couple things that I hope you noticed in the design of those materials, it's this type of instructional model called a storyline. And this is really, really big in science education right now in K-12 spaces. And this model is linked at the end of the presentation, so you've got it in your slides. But this instructional model where things start with an anchoring phenomenon. And hopefully this anchoring phenomenon is something that's relevant in the student's world or can be made relevant. So what we mean by phenomenon is just an observable event that we can analyze, dissect, that doesn't have a straight right or wrong answer from the get-go, that we need multiple investigations to figure out. So students engage with this, they develop their own questions around it using a driving question board technique. And then that leads us to be able to say, okay, what are the science ideas we need to figure out in order to explain this? Let's tackle one. And then that investigation routine that comes next, we're designing an investigation around answering that specific question. And then we'll go back to the anchoring phenomenon, figure out, okay, what is our investigation? Tell us about what we experienced at first. What's the bigger picture now that we know, and what are our gaps? So this problematizing routine is surfacing the gaps we still have left, figuring out what we need to tackle next, and then engaging in an investigation to tackle that science idea. This happens over and over and over again until we've got all our questions answered about that initial phenomenon. So that's the goal with the the way we're constructing science materials to really intentionally move students through a process of figuring out that is, it seems like it's coming from the students because they're generating their own questions. So it's a really complicated process, all based on phenomenon. So when I say phenomenon driven, what I mean is that students are put in a situation that is experienced, that's felt, where they're seeing something that it's a little unusual for them, and they're being asked to notice, make observations, and they're being asked to wonder, develop these questions that then lead to investigations. So when we say phenomenon driven, it's not just to engage a student and then we go back to our, like, let's explain at them. It's, we're using the phenomenon to guide students through their own chain of student sense making. So just a quick overview. This Ethos for Science Education document has been released for about a year now. Some of you on the call were instrumental in helping develop this document. Looking at David Harwood, he was part of this process. A lot of educators across Nebraska helped write this. It's in 4 different statements. The reason why we're doing what we're doing, why is science even important, the vision, what we hope to see in Nebraska classrooms, any educational opportunity that students engage with, hopefully it's looking something like this. And then the mission statement, how are we going to get there? And the equity statement, who is it for? It's for everyone. So making sure we're including multiple perspectives. So what I'd like you to do now is, if you go to that spot on my screen where it says you are viewing Audrey Webb's screen, go to view options and then down to annotate. You can pick stamps, arrows, different things like that. And you should be able to do things like, oh, I'm going to make a heart. So you should be able to do that. And then what I'd like you to do is just spend about a minute skimming this document and putting a heart or a star next to something that really stands out for you as what is the crux of science education. If you are not finding this editing, annotating feature on your Zoom, it's okay to just drop a quote in the chat. So I'll give about a minute to engage with this document. I'm loving all of the annotations around the purpose statement, just getting back to that reason, why are we here in the first place? It's critical thinking, it's figuring out, it's investigating and challenging our worldviews. A lot of people hearted that last one. And then in the vision statement, a lot of that communication, science is communication. So true. Science is making sense of the world around us and finding solutions to global problems. Like Dr. Harwood talked about in the last session, we have a lot of global problems and a community of scientists can combat that and rise up to the challenge. I love that annotation, that circle around all, it's all Nebraskans, all Nebraskans. Okay. So if you haven't had time to read through the whole thing, not a big deal. This document I will have linked at the end as well. And so this is something that I have seen in countless classrooms. It's been the start of professional developments across the state. And the more and more we bring people into this vision, the better. So hopefully we can be sort of on the same page. So a couple things, just some statements that kind of, I think, really boil down some of the aspects of that ethos. We're moving away from decontextualized, discrete facts into this holistic systems way of thinking about inviting students into the figuring out process, treating students like the scientists they are and helping them advance in their skills, advance in their lenses of seeing the world, and being able to figure out and explain the world around them. So some things about the standards. So we talk about 3-dimensional standards, and all that means is the science education community got together about a decade ago and figured out this is in order to really measure students progressing not just in their science ideas, but in the ways that they are scientists. We need to make our standards robust enough to fit all of that. So we have 3 different dimensions in science. The practices, that's basically the actions of doing science. You'll see things like data analysis. You'll see things like model building. You'll see things like communicating information. The cross-cutting concepts, that's really, I think of it as the lenses of science. These are like patterns, scale, proportion, quantity. These cause and effect, structure, function, the big sort of lenses we can view multiple disciplines of science through. And then the core ideas, those are the science ideas of, okay, let's explain biodiversity, ecosystem health, those types of things, those are the core ideas. So these dimensions are put together: a DCI, disciplinary core idea, a science and engineering practice, the actions, and the cross-cutting concepts, the lenses, put together in a statement that is called a performance expectation. So these performance expectations look like this. This is just a screenshot from the science standards at kindergarten, and you'll see each statement has all 3 parts. Use observations to describe. That's a science engineering practice. It's what students are doing. Patterns, that's the underlying cross-cutting concept. Okay, as scientists, we need to think about the patterns, which are relevant, which are not. That's the lens we're thinking through as patterns. And then DCI, disciplinary core ideas of what plants and animals need to survive. So that's that science concept that now we've contextualized within a process by putting it into this 3-dimensional. The other thing I'd like to note is that we've got in the standards, we've got places where Nebraska Plants and Animals, Nebraska conservation organizations, we've highlighted connections. However, they're really general and broad, and I think really hard to figure out how to tap into. So I've got a couple ideas about how we can start this process of how informal science organizations that are just sitting here with a wealth of information about Nebraska plants and animals, agricultural practices, different ecological or geological phenomena that are happening in our state, how we can start weaving them into the standards process. Also, if you're curious, if you are creating any materials and you're not sure, okay, what's appropriate for a kindergartner, what's appropriate for an 8th grader, what's appropriate for a senior, I've linked 2 sources for you. The K-12 DCI progressions, it's an appendix in the NGSS that kind of highlights for every single topic idea across K-12 where students should be. And then if you're looking for not just the DCIs, but also the practices and the cross-cutting concepts, the atlas of the 3 dimensions is an extremely valuable tool. I use it all the time to figure out, okay, where in the matrix should our students be? Where should we be hitting them? So both of these are resources for you. One's free. The atlas is I think $60, but I found it worth it. So one idea, and this is a huge initiative of the Nebraska Department of Education right now, is coming up with standards aligned kind of discrete formative assessments. And formative assessments, I think, is a really, really powerful tool. They're deeply tied to the standards, but they feel like instruction for students, and they sort of feel like instruction for teachers as well, but they're so closely aligned to the construct that we know we're hitting the standards based on our design. So we have been, as a field, creating formative task bank for all standards K-12 We're about halfway done, and it looks like to me it's going to take about 2 more years to finish. But this bank, and if you click on the link here, it'll take you to where it's located. The password is Science FA. And if you're interested in training about this, please let me know. But I kind of wanted to show you, educators are engaging in a process called Principled Assessment Design.
Audrey, you have about
Yes?
five more minutes. Just want to
Okay, perfect. I'll rush through this. Principled assessment design to design tasks aligned to standards. And I just wanted to show you this one that just came into the repository last month. And it's utilizing all of these resources put out by Nebraska Game and Parks. Students are asked to do research, they're asked to engage in Nebraska ecosystems, and they make claims, support them with evidence. It's a really robust task based on resources put out by Nebraska Game and Parks. This is something that I just love to see across all standards and indicators. So, and how it's been impacting instruction. Close to 500 educators have been trained in this process so far. And with that number is just always growing. Also, all of these tasks in there are aligned to what we're putting out at our state assessment right now. They're phenomenon-based tasks, integrated. And here's an example of what a task looks like. This assessment is being operationalized statewide in the spring. So there's just a lot of coherence in the system right now between the science summative and all of these formative assessment tasks. So some ways that I really think would be powerful to make those Nebraska connections really strong between informal and formal spaces is developing some standards aligned resources for educators, developing storylines using these criteria, which I've linked, and then maybe even getting training in this principled assessment design process in order to be creating these formative tasks that educators across the state are using in their statewide assessment systems. For example, Grand Island is changing their entire district interim benchmark assessment system into these tasks that are based on local Nebraska phenomena. And then lastly, the standards revision process is coming up. It's going to start in 2023, continue on to 2024. And what's really important to me is getting and prioritizing a diverse set of voices and perspectives in the revision work, and then prioritizing this Nebraska connection space that has been pointed out, but I think could just be so robust and powerful for educators. So I'm really excited to network with you all, figure out ways to kind of plug in into these, untapped spaces. Just want to kind of let you know, I also send out a monthly memo. It's archived on the Science Education homepage. If you're interested in getting on this monthly memo list, please send me an email, I'll put you on. And if you're interested in the training around principled assessment design, let me know. Interested in plugging into standards process that's going to begin spring of 2023, let me know. And this work. So hopefully, did I end on time, Jamie?
Oh yes, you are right on schedule.
Perfect.
So amazing. We did have one question earlier on in the chat, and if anybody else has any questions, you could drop it in the chat now, and we'll make sure to get those asked. But one question earlier, they wanted to know what schools were helping pilot that project that we reviewed, that we shared, or that you shared.
So it's Nebraska City, North Platte, and Garden County. And Garden County's way out west in, what's that town? It's really close to Scotts Bluff. But yeah, Garden County.
All right, wonderful. And Audrey, I had a question that I was thinking about. So if someone is new to this field and they have that they're really wanting to do some aligning of their resources that they have, and it seems a little bit overwhelming. What are a few things that you could give somebody that's new to this, that wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I can't do this with kids because I don't have it aligned to the science standards? Any advice would you give to somebody that is trying to make sure that they are providing good resources, but are feeling a little overwhelmed?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that's a whole thing, is that I just sort of gave a whole scale of best practices, and there are a lot of incremental ways to kind of start into the work. So some places I check out is the Exploratorium. I linked that at the beginning. It does a really pretty good job so it is a science museum that has been, over the last decade, aligning their resources that they put out through the Science Museum to K-12 spaces. So they have an NGSS designing tool. They have a lot of phenomena already, like the NOAA data and analysis thing that I linked through. So I would check out the Exploratorium. And then the Wonder of Science also does a really, really nice job of breaking things down. They've got a really nice template too for people if you're interested in designing resources. And then of course, I'm always here for questions or anything if you're wondering what direction your material should look like.
Awesome. Yeah, I would second the Exploratorium has some great resources. Christy is wanting to know, how can we get connected with teacher training for these new processes?
So if you get on my monthly memo, I advertise every single training that we do. And then also my counterpart in the assessment department and we have been putting trainings on sort of on demand at the moment. So if you're interested in something, a training for your organization, that's something we're happy to do. We can also get several organizations together for a training in the process as well. I would love to schedule something like that.
Wonderful. If there aren't any other questions, if you still have a question and you want to get that answered, we can put that in the chat. We still have a few more minutes left of this session. Also, the Jamboard is active and going. So if you have some other thoughts or things that you want to add to that, make sure you do jump over to the Jamboard and check those items out that people have been interacting with today, all day today. To do that, thank you, Amber, for adding. Audrey's contact information is there now in the chat, and then the Jamboard link as well. So Audrey, thank you so much. That was very informative, and I love how you made that so interactive with us, even virtually. So thank you for doing that. We have a little bit of a break now. Let me get my schedule pulled up here. There's a break now for lunch until 1 o'clock, and then sessions begin again at 1 o'clock, and then new Zoom links to those afternoon sessions are provided in the email that you got with the agenda. Amber, is there anything else that we need to go over before ending our session?
I don't think so. Hopefully it's working well for everyone to hop back and forth if they want to see a session in either of the concurrent sessions. But we will be back at 1. And don't forget, after that, there's a short break, and then we're going to have a networking session as well. So hopefully we can have some good discussion from all the things we've learned today. My only comment was, we have over an hour. If you can get outside while it's still nice out, you should today. So that's what I will probably be doing really briefly.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. And again, Audrey, thank you if you're still on. Thank you for your great presentation. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in about an hour.